What was your worst fuck up at work? Early in my career, I did a briefing for a select client group and didn't check the attendee list. I talked about some companies and sectors we were bullish on, and someone from the crowd asked me my thoughts on Company X. I said that Company X needed generational change in management that understood their market was modernizing and they needed to invest in technology at a faster rate. I then said that Company Y, their primary competitor, was a better investment because they got it. Couple things there. One, Company X's CFO was in the room and I didn't know. Two, the person asking the question didn't know Company X was represented in the room. Company X's super fund was a large institutional investor of ours. I got a very stern talking to from my manager afterward for being unprepared. I got a meeting with our local CEO, which was the first time that happened. I was at the start of my career progression, so past intern and greenhorn, and moving up when this happened. Our CEO said he'd read some of my analysis work after he'd heard of my episode, and he checked out my portfolio treatments and advice. He said, "Your work is impressive for someone with diminished mental capacity." I sat there expecting to get fired, but then he laughed and said he was joking. He asked me what I said during the QA. I told him. He said he agreed with my analysis and that he told Company X's CEO and CFO that the loose-lipped kid was spot on. He told me to check the attendee list next time and be smarter, but that we make money and our clients make money when we do good analysis and back ourselves. As I was leaving, he asked me how my manager took it, and I said he shared his thoughts with me loudly. He rolled his eyes and told me not to worry about it. About a year later, my manager, Dave, got restructured out. A few weeks afterward, I bumped into our CEO in the lift, and he asked if I liked my new manager, Jen, and I said she was exceptional and very smart. He said, "Yeah, she's bright and doesn't suffer fools." Dave was mediocre. You'll do well if you follow in Jen's wake. Within 3 years of working for her, I was promoted twice, and to this day, consider her my mentor. She moved on a few years ago to a big role in NY, but now she's retired and sits on a few boards here in Australia to fill her time. I catch up with her for lunch every 3 months, like clockwork, to pick her brain. So when you duck up, find the silver lining. Story 2. How do I prioritize them? Probably the worst one was when I was recruiting for a very large corporation. They were looking for a team of 15 specialists in a program called Mercator. It was urgent, they said. So I led a team of 3 of us, and we worked 21 days straight, including weekends, to get a short list together of about 22 candidates in Sydney and Melbourne. I sent the short list of CVs to the client, in this case a middling HR manager. After a week and a half of leaving calls and emailing her, I received no response. My boss told me to leave a message with an ultimatum. "Please call me back in with interview times for these candidates, or we need to escalate it to your boss." I was in our Melbourne office and unfamiliar with the phones. I left the message, "Hi X, could you please call me back before noon today? My boss has asked me to call your boss if I haven't heard from you by then. The candidates are getting very restless, and I believe we're delivered these CVs in record time. Thanks." I hung up the phone and angrily said to myself, "Just ducking, call me back, you stupid Karen." 2 seconds later, the phone speaker said, "Message received." I went ice cold. Obviously, the phone had not hung up. This was going to cost me my job. I sat there arguing with myself about whether I should follow up with another message, apologizing for swearing and making up some bullcrap story about not really meaning for the message to be for her. It was all bullcrap, of course. She knew I was cranky with her. I called the key account manager, who I got on very well with, and explained the story. "Duck, this could be big trouble for us." I said I knew that and that I would take 100% of the responsibility. That was a Friday. Monday comes around and my colleague is in Melbourne while I am back in our office in Sydney. He calls me and says, "How much would you pay me if I could save your job?" I said, "5,000, and meant it. He then said to hang on for 10 seconds. The phone was silent. Then he came back on the line. "Did I hear anything?" he asked. "No, complete silence." He said the phone did not have a hands-free microphone and the speaker was only one way. When you hang the phone up, it only mutes it. You've got to press a button to actually hang up the stupid thing up properly. I was off the hook, and he didn't make me pay the $5,000. I have never made that mistake again. Story 3. Had to book flights for all managers to go over to Thailand for a business trip, around 8 people. I sent out an email requesting all names and date of birth to book the flights, and John, one of Mangers, has sent me all of his details via email, and I sent a return email with all flight tickets. John then emailed me back saying his real name is actually Jonathan. Yeah, great, thanks for that. I spent 3 hours on hold at work and couldn't get through to the airline, so called after hours at home. I had so much anxiety because I was new to the job and didn't want to make it a big deal. I finally got through and they said I would need to pay extra to change the name and needed the credit card details. Problem was I was at home and didn't have my boss's card. The following day, wrote down his card details, and after work, called again, finally got through, gave them the credit card details, and they then asked for the Opti code, which was the SMS approval from the bank, but it was obviously sent to my boss's mobile number. Pretty sure I cried at this point and debated quitting. I went into work the following day and repeated the process, but came clean to my boss and told him I needed the opt code. He was a little annoyed, but think he maybe understood. After all that stress, finally, it was all over. Until 2 days before they fly out, another manger comes and says his date of birth is wrong on his ticket. F's. This was actually my mistake, but there's no way I'm telling my boss I ducked up again. I'm waiting for my boss to leave the office and then go up to the guy whose date of birth is wrong and tell him the boss is out of the office. Can I use your card to fix the booking? He says. Sure, that's fine. I call, fix it up, all done. Send him the email of the new ticket. He comes back to my desk. Sorry, the dob is wrong again. I was so close to just walking out and never returning. I then got so annoyed that I decided to just rebook a whole new flight and not call and get a return because I could not be bothered. So I booked an additional flight, which was finally correct, and told him that the other incorrect flight will be a return on the card, but could take 14 days. Total lie. Just thought I'll throw that to someone in accounts to deal with later down the track. Story 4. I used to work as a bartender, and a group of 4-ish ladies came in asking for jam donut shots. Essentially, it's a shot glass rimmed in icing sugar, raspberry liqueur, and Irish cream, although that may be wrong, but it's how we made it. It was super busy, and I was already flustered from a previous round of cocktails, and there were so many people waiting, so I was moving a million miles an hour. Anyway, I go out back to rim these shot glasses. Our icing sugar was kept in a plain white container with a bunch of similar stuff next to it, and none of it seemed to be labeled. You just had to take a teaspoon, put some on your pinky, and try it. I know right what could go wrong. So what was on the shelf in these unmarked white containers? Castor sugar, icing sugar, bicarb soda, salt, and TSP. Of course, in the heat of the moment, I decide I remember where the icing sugar is and don't do my regular teaspoon test. I serve the 4 shots to the ladies and they all start coughing. Oh my God, what is that? Is that salt? One of them says. The horror, I kid you not. These innocent patrons may as well have been having asthma attacks and severe coughing simultaneously. 2 of them run to the bathroom to presumably throw up. I go back and check in haste to see what I had actually used. Where is the salt? Oh, it's over here, so I definitely didn't use that one. It must have been the bicarb soda. Wrong, that bucket was empty. Turns out I had used TSP. What is that, you ask? Trisodium phosphate is a white, granular, or crystalline solid, highly soluble in water, producing an alkaline solution. TSP is used as cleaning agent, builder, food additive, stain remover, and degreaser. This is the stuff we use in the dishwasher anyway. In my stupidly, I did the teaspoon test before I found out it was TSC and had the coughs myself for a good hour. I had to sit down and stop working. I have no idea what happened to those ladies. I didn't charge them money, at least. Thanks for listening to my story of how I nearly or very well may have poisoned people with jam donut shots. Story 5. Back in the 90s, I worked for a GPS company to provide GPS signals to specialty GPS devices long before we had them in our pockets. I worked the night shift and it was usually dead as most customers worked during the day, and we weren't worldwide back then. I was a student during the day, so it was accepted that I could sleep at work as long as I woke up for alarms and phone calls. One night, I woke while standing up with an angry voice in my ear. I realized I was holding a phone, and sure enough, there was an angry person on the other end demanding I fix the issue that had been going on for over an hour. I realized all the alarms in my office are blaring, but after working there for years, I couldn't hear that particular frequency very well. It was a single tone alarm. I tell the person that I'm fixing it, turn off the alarm, run into the other room, and enable the backup line. The signal went up and it's all good, except it wasn't. I found out sometime later that the person calling me was on a big surveying vessel, towing kilometers of surveying lines, can't remember the official name, behind them. They were approaching port when the signal went down, and since it was nighttime, they could only rely on their instruments alone. As the issue went for so long, they ended up having to turn the ship around to approach the port again, and with kilometers of line behind them. That meant doing a huge loop so the lines wouldn't tangle, which took several hours. The GPS signal came back and they were eventually able to approach port again, but by then a huge storm had come in, which I guess is what they were trying to avoid in the first place. It was now too dangerous to dock, and so they had to go back out to sea and wait for it to pass. But being monsoon season, that meant 2+ weeks out at sea, paying everyone on board top dollar, and costing the company a fortune. I heard it was $1 million plus at the time. From that point on, I wasn't allowed to sleep at work anymore. But I wasn't fired, and I don't know if anything else came from it. Story 6. Car mechanic. I left a door on a car ajar, then raised it up on the hoist. Unknown to me, a gust of wind caused the door to open wider than I had left it. So consequently, the door frame jammed under the top of the hoist. I noticed the hoist struggling a bit, then heard a metallic pop and felt a shudder, but thought nothing of it at the time. Just figured the hoist had threw a wobbly, and I would report to the boss on completion. So I finished what I was doing under the car, lowered it back down, and was met with the gut-wrenching sight of the driver's door pretty much folded in half. And then when I checked the latch, also realizing it had bent the A-pillar. It had to go to the body shop to have the chassis straightened out and a new door painted and fitted. Cost about $4K from memory. Boss was great about it, to be fair. He knew I felt like crap about it, so didn't chew me out. He wasn't that kind of guy anyway. But it was literally, crap happens, mate. Don't beat yourself up, I'll get it sorted. Not the most expensive mistake I've seen, though, although the most expensive one I've done. Saw another guy PDI a brand new van, then fill it with petrol, and not realize he had done so until it shuddered and cut out on test drive. Wrecked the entire fuel system, which had to be replaced at over $7K. Then, another guy jacked a motorhome up on the wrong part of the rear axle, twisted the shock mount irreparably, meaning it needed an entire rear axle, which cost about $15K as it was rear-wheel drive. Then there's the two destroyed cars. One was a Peugeot 406 Coupe V6 that a guy did something to the injectors, refitted them incorrectly, and didn't notice it was leaking fuel until it caught fire on test drive, and he had to call the boss and then stand there and watch it burn down. Then another guy who had a first service on a 1-year-old Mazda RX-8 back when they had only just came out, went for a joyride in it and barrel rolled it into a ditch. Mine's actually pretty tame now I think about it. Story 7. Not me, but my mate. He was manager for a group of about 8 people, all fairly senior, comparatively. While traveling in a taxi with a colleague, one had a brilliant idea and called my mate to get his support. Unfortunately, that particular thing had been tried before and to no particular result. So my mate explained this and said of course he wouldn't be doing that thing. Okay, says the caller and hangs up. 2 seconds later, my mate's phone rings again from the same person. They've bum dialed him and haven't realized. In what they thought was a private conversation in the back of the taxi, the two of them bag him out mercilessly. He's useless, a liar, a pain in the ass, a coward, promoted beyond his capability, etc., and so on, with real anger in their voice. My mate is yelling down the phone at them to try to make them aware he's on the line. This, when I tuned into what was going on, I was only a couple of desks away and he was yelling loud enough to be heard from the far end of the floor. To no avail. Eventually the call dies as the taxi goes through a tunnel. He immediately calls them back and they're all warm and collegial as they answer. Hey John, what can we do for you? He says. Before you say another word, you need to know that you dialed me accidentally just after our last conversation, and I heard every word that the two of you said. Silence, followed by a very small oh. Yes, he confirms, I want the two of you here tomorrow in our city for a serious talk. In that meeting, there was much contrition. It wasn't so much what they said. He told them they could disagree with him professionally, and that would be perfectly okay. They were even welcome to their private views about whether he was a good manager. It was the talking crap about him, especially behind his back, that had him seeing red. Those people definitely ducked up that day. Story 8. When I was a second or third year apprentice in the hi-fi repair business, I was working for a company that imported and distributed high-end hi-fi. The brand we represented had just started building extremely high-end car systems, and the owner of the company wanted one in his Merc. It was a 380 on the CE. Suffice it to say, it was not a shabby model. He'd had it resprayed by a guy in Camperdown who at the time was considered the car painter in Sydney. This was back in the 80s before sound systems were built in and integrated. So my boss and I were installing the system, and it was all going well, until I was stripping a wire over the front guard. My boss said to me, "Be careful," but I was a cocky 17-year-old and continued, and pretty much straight away after flicked my hand off the end of the wire, driving my side cutters into the guard, and scratching through about 2 mm of multiple, carefully applied coats of gold metallic paint. The scratch went to the metal and continued for about 4 centimeters. I think I can recall seeing a piggy tail curl of paint and undercoat come off. Now let me put this in context. I was a poor apprentice, earning barely $100 a week, and I had just quite visibly damaged a paint job that was probably worth $10K. I saw what I did and I couldn't even get a word out. I was in total shock. My boss, a total hero, saw what I'd done and the state of me and told me not to worry, he'd take the blame. That was Friday afternoon. On Monday morning, the owner saw the scratch and the mushroom cloud went up. True to his word, my boss took the blame. The total legend. After that, the owner cooled down, but I tell you what, at the time I thought I'd be fired or have a heart attack. That event is burnt into my consciousness. 43 years later, it still makes me shudder. Story 9. My duck-up occurred when I was a third-year apprentice. Well, to be truthful, it was my fault technically. I was given a job to cut some large square tubing at a certain length using a huge cold saw. The cutting blade was over a meter in diameter. I set up some rollers and had them firmly bolted to the ground, in which I marked the said distance, and welded a large metal stop. Now, by all accounts, there were going to be over 1,000 lengths cut. I cut the first length and measured. Spot on, I then measure every 3 cut to make sure it was still accurate. I did this for the first 200 or so. I then made the decision if after the 200 cuts, what could go wrong. So I proceeded cutting. I was 200 when I decide by chance to measure again. To my astonishment, the measurement was 20 millimeters short. I panicked and went back and measured all the others' lengths. I found after the 200, I did first the lengths, started to get shorter gradually. I freaked and told the foreman, this is where the crap hit the fan. I was in serious trouble and was facing being sacked. If it was not for the shop steward noticing that the actual cold saw was not bolted secure to the floor. What had happened was the hydraulic vice jaws, as they closed, because the cold saw to creep physically toward the said stop. Why it didn't happen sooner in the cutting cycle is a mystery to me. I was let off with a stern warning and a scolding that I would never forget. It caused a lot of work and expense for others to rectify. It was my fault technically. I should never have stopped checking the cuts. Lesson learned. I still feel ashamed today. That was over 30 years ago. Story 10. At my first professional job, working in the office of a building company owned by my uncle, I used to do a bit of overtime to get through some more work and easy some extra cash. I also used to work with my cousin, aforementioned uncle's stepdaughter, and we used to hang out a fair bit on the weekends too. On a particular Saturday that I was working in an empty office, my cousin called me and asked if I wanted any substances. Yes, I would actually. Can you drop it off at my work? She came by a bit later and dropped it off, and as I kept working, I had the bag next to me on the workstation. After an hour or so, just next to me, my boss does the whole surprise boo to scare me as he snuck in knowing I would be there on my own. At this stage, I had totally forgotten about the weed, just there. Boss looks down and sees the substances. He picks it up, checks it out, and smells it a bit. That's pretty good stuff. How much does this go for? 50 or... Not bad. Sorry, I should have dropped it at home. He slaps me on the back. Don't worry about it. Keep up the good work. And he leaves. Okay, that worked out better than I'd thought. I learned my lesson to not be so casual with my substances. But the following Monday at work, I have an envelope on my desk. I got my first and only written warning about bringing illegal substances into the office. Story 11. I'm not in corporate world, but the fashion industry. Many years ago, I was dressing an international model for a fashion parade. As usual, I had no clue who she was. The parade was called 100 Moments in Fashion, and she was wearing vintage 1970s Holston dress in one section. In her dressing room, the stylist, hair, and makeup team were discussing how they could quickly update her look to reflect the sexy, sleek dress. And I pipe up. There's a picture at Studio 50 in this month's magazine in a Holston dress. As I reach for the magazine and flick to the article, I am vaguely aware everyone is silent and staring at me, gobsmacked. She grabs the magazine and says, "Oh yes, that is gorgeous. Let's do it." And everyone reanimates. I think nothing more of the incident after the parade. Some other dressers asked me what she was like. I gushed about how sweet she was and said she showed me pics of her son. One of their responses was, "Does he have rock star's lips?" It suddenly dawns on me. This model is new girlfriend of the rock star, and I suggested they do her hair like his ex. It turns out she loved that. I didn't know who she was. I was being genuine and honest with her, and she got her part people to book me to dress her for the rest of her events. It was the start of me moving from being a just dresser to head dresser in 20 years as alteration seamstress to celebrities, special events, and advertising. Story 12. When I lived back in the UK, I was an assistant manager in a business center in London. My boss was hardly ever there. Due to some illness flare-up, he'd get a lot, and he was quite often uncontactable for several days at a time. One day he was off, and I remember him saying something about photocopiers needing to be swapped over or something. These two guys happened to turn up from a printer copier machine company on the day he was off, and I mistakenly signed contracts with them for several thousands of pounds worth of equipment that I thought had already been agreed to by the main manager. Total dumbass move on my part when a couple of days later, they turn up with loads of huge copiers and start installing them on each floor of the business center. Finally, my manager gets back to me and I mention to him, the new copiers have arrived and are being installed. He didn't know what I was talking about. And when he gets in the next day, he can't believe what I'd signed the business up to. Months went by of legal wranglings with the copier company, who were refusing to take the equipment away, saying we were legally obliged to keep and pay for them, and my manager and the business owners arguing that I didn't have enough authority to have even signed the contract. I ended up leaving the company a few months after it all happened, and even years later when speaking to my old manager, he was saying there were still legal threats going on back and forth until the business center was finally closed. Absolutely. This is the most worst duck-up I have ever done at work. Story 13. Not my screw you, but I heard it via a company I worked for. This one was in mining, but no matter how bad you messed up, there's no way you could have had this level of fury leveled at you for a justified reason. The dump trucks that haul around mines are huge, so much so that if you reversed into a Land Cruiser, it would squish like a beer can. If I name the make and model of vehicle involved with this incident, it might accidentally expose someone, despite being 30 years ago. There are two types of machine operator. The machine operator that asks questions such as, "What does that warning buzzer mean?" And "What's that horrible crunching, grinding noise?" Then there's the rock ape, oblivious to just about anything until something goes wrong. In this case, the rock ape gets into the cab of the dump truck and reverses. He feels a grating on his rear wheel, but thinks he can shake it off. Idiot reverses 100 meters, and it's clear that it won't shake off. Rock ape gets down from the cab to find a dual cab truck hanging off his rear wheel. The front axle is bent like a banana. The windscreen is smashed. The front end doesn't look so good. There are two people in the front of the cab. Other than brown underpants, they're unharmed. Said mine was FIFO. The mine manager was very angry because of the headaches a mines department investigation would generate. He was heard to say something like, "I don't care what your excuse is, walk to the road, now." Civilization would have been hundreds of kilometers away from the mine. Story 14. This happened several years ago when I was young and naive. I, 20-Sef, was new to my workplace and started having uncomfortable exchanges with a coworker, let's call him Larry, 30s. Long story short, he wanted people to believe we were dating, spread rumors to support this story, and set me up in ways to make it appear like we were, such as telling me I had to report to his office, when unbeknownst to me, I was meant to be in another office, inviting me to have a coffee catch-up. When I would go to meet him, he'd be like, "Coffee? No thanks, I just had some," requesting that I go to his office to pick up some paperwork to pass on to my manager, and then not having any paperwork. My mistake. I confided in a female colleague, Kim, about Larry and asked for advice whether I should report the situation. Turns out Kim is besties with Larry and told him. Larry, being a popular guy, changed the rumors to I was harassing him. Everyone believed him and turned on me. It got to a point where a supervisor was notified, and I had to explain the situation to the GM. I had no text evidence that I could show, and it was all brushed off and no action taken. I spent so many shifts where I was ostracized by coworkers. It was awful. Thankfully moved out of that toxic workplace to another location that has a much better culture. Narcissists are in every workplace. The quicker you learn to identify them and shield yourself, the better. Story 15. It was 2 days before Christmas, and I was asked to send a rejection email to everyone who was unsuccessful for a particular role we had advertised. That was the first mistake, being so close to Christmas. Because our process was all manual, and we didn't have a system to send automated emails out, I had to send the email via Outlook. I was in a rush, and instead of putting all the candidate emails into the BCC bit, it went into the CC bit, which resulted in everyone seeing who else had applied, essentially breaching confidentiality. There was about 60, and it's a small industry, so lots of people would have known others in the group. I was extremely mortified and felt sick, thought I'd lose my job for sure. Had to ring the IT guys to see if we could retract it, but it was too late. Had to then ring both my boss and the CEO, by this stage it was like 6 p.m., who ended up sending an apology email on behalf of the company. To top it off, a few disgruntled candidates then started sending emails to the whole entire email recipient list, going off at me, the company, and everything else. It was horrendous. Some people responded to say, "Don't worry about it, mistakes happen, etc." But some people were just nasty and probably confirmed our decision not to go ahead with them anyway. But the emails kept going for a few days afterwards. I thankfully didn't lose my job, but definitely a few lessons learned from that mortifying experience. Story 16, an outstanding duck accident from my grad era that still has the power to make me wake up with cold sweats. RFI on an application, printed it out so I could highlight for comprehension so I didn't miss anything, and tick off each one as I was done preparing it. It's a go slow waiting for inputs from A, B, and C specialists. Put it all together, send it back in. Time passes. Client calls. Where's the stuff addressing X specialist thing on the RFI? Check my hard copy, highlighted and ticked off paperwork. Nothing. Client, there wasn't a request for X specialist input. What are you talking about? Knock off. Go for a swim. 7 p.m. Friday, lap 11. Brain retrieves a visual memory that the RFI file was 4 pages. The hard copy printout was 3 pages. Did the printer eat the last page with X specialist request on it? Team lead was still in the office when I appeared still damp and in my swim gear to check the original file. They were unimpressed, but gracious. Application was delayed for another month or two while we got that X specialist input sorted. I make sure I compare hard copy printouts and page numbers to the soft copy now when I'm doing that crap. Story 17. I can take the cake here. I was working as an IT contractor at a software development firm. Did orientation first day, all good. I plugged my iPhone into the computer and went to lunch. Came back and every guy was staring at me. I was the only woman working there. I went to the bathroom to check. I didn't have my undies tucked into my dress. Nope, all good. I go to sit down, these guys are still staring at me. The lead dev comes over and goes, "Just so you know, we have Dropbox Sync in this office." I said, "Okay, why are you telling me this?" It turns out that when you plug the lighting cable into the USB drive, all the images download off your phone and into the company Dropbox, where everyone can see them. Obviously, it was full of nudes, and not even good nudes. Pics of me in beige underpants and no top on for weight loss progress, and pics of me breastfeeding. Absolutely horrifying and a terrible invasion of privacy. I ring the recruiter and tell him what happened. He thinks it's a joke and is laughing over the phone. I said, "Mate, I am not joking. I will not be going back ever." He convinced me no one would care the next day, probably for his commission check, but I did go back. It took about a week for the awkwardness to go down. Story 18. Oh, it's only work, mate, nothing life or death. But enjoy the following. On an ancient program we were using, we had a process button right next to a delete button. It wouldn't just delete what you were working on, but the entire client's profile. Guess who was on data entry and deleted 188 clients from the system? We renamed it the Doom button afterwards. I once sent some critically confidential documents to the wrong client. I printed out the wrong label. I organized servicing for equipment at a giant client's 8X warehouse. Forgetting to advise them this was out of warranty servicing, they went spare when they got a $87,000 bill. I forgot to change over the phones when I was leaving, which resulted in a poor gentleman being stuck in a lift with no assistance for hours. Yeah, I got a written warning for that one. My CEO and my manager had the same first name. So I sent an email to my manager caring about a dumb process and product change. Something along the lines of, if blank wasn't surrounded by yes men, he wouldn't be such a mushroom, but sent it to my CEO when on a 4-week holiday and encrypted an important file that my team was meant to present. Forgot to advise the password. Try to feel better. Story 19. Early on in my career, I was dealing with a really difficult absolute tosspot of a client and needed some regularly help from my manager. On one occasion, he was being extremely unreasonable, so I went to FDI. The email to my manager, I said, "Guess who is being an a-hole again? Can you please help me out with this?" After I clicked send, I realized I did not in fact click FDI, but reply. Obviously, my manager gave me a good talking to about it. It led to a meeting with my manager and the actual client a few days later. Although it was a major duck-up, apparently, he had no idea how he was coming across to people in our organization. He ended up completely being enlightened by my duck-up, and he is still a client of mine almost 10 years later, and we've got along well ever since. Sometimes duck-ups play out differently than expected. Story 20 was on a training call for a new application, which our CEO was also on. The person describing the software was wasting so much time positioning it, covering old ground, and I just wanted to see it in application to see how it worked, and I was busy as duck. I said, exasperated, "Duck, just show us the ducking software already." The presenter stopped, then said something like, "Oh, I'm sorry, did you want me to move on?" Confused, I looked at the mute icon in the Zoom window. Microphone symbol was sitting nice and open, no little line through it. All the color drained out of my face. I mumbled something about that I was on another call or something, then trailed off, apologized, went on to mute, then looked at the window I was sitting next to, wondering if I used enough force if I could jump out of it. CEO calls me up later. I'm crapting myself. He said, "Man, that was pretty bad," then starts laughing uncontrollably at me, saying, "You really shouldn't have done that, but you just said what we were all thinking." Continues to laugh at me. I said, "Glad I could amuse you. Going to jump out a window now? Bye." A few years later, still working there. So, here we are. Story 21. I used to do rostering in my job, and someone had sent me a rostering request that I just couldn't make happen. I went to see them and explain I couldn't do it and why, but I gave them 3 different alternatives that I could do. She wasn't happy with that at all. Sent her boss numerous text messages and phone calls to discuss my inability to be flexible. Then sent an email to her boss, saying they shouldn't put up with my attitude, and if they let me win, I will only continue to do it in the future, and then bagged the absolute crap out of me. She sent it to me instead of her boss, an email saying lots of horrible things about me. She realizes her mistake and recalls the email, but not before I see it and am laughing hysterically. Her boss goes to see my boss and whine about me. Did not go down well, and they were both dragged through HR. We had to go to a meeting and mediation. I'm in the meeting going, "Mate, that should have been a phone call. Don't put crap like that in an email. That's your biggest mistake." I thought it was hilarious, HR not so much. Story 22, I had a good one. I worked for a primary school as an IT guy, and it was coming up to school holidays. So as usual, I sent out the usual email to all employees of the school, stating that they are all not here and that I still will be here. So I'll be updating all the Windows PCs with the latest Windows build during this time. Make sure all your important files are backed up Then I proceeded to update each PC, including the principals. The funny thing is, I only worked 2 days a week. And the first day back after holidays, I get a phone call from the admin ladies and the principal, absolutely grilling me and yelling, stating that the principal's documents and files are deleted. What happened? I told them I updated the computer and they were like, no, I shouldn't have done that. There were important files and now they are gone. I was like, I sent 2 emails stating this was going to happen. And I even explained that if I didn't do it a power outage, or if the computer completely died, the files would be gone then too. They didn't like that answer. Still claimed it was my fault and I shouldn't have done that, etc. Story 23. Maybe not the biggest, but the one that had the biggest impact on me. Very junior job at 18, third day. Get tasked with typing up a list of data in an Excel spreadsheet that an old senior person had handwritten. Get called in hours after I submit it, and all the errors get pointed out. I get told to correct it, so I ask for the original handwritten list back. Old mate says that he shredded it. Not that it is in the trash, shredded. I then have to try and reconstruct the list using what is in his pile of files, which don't have any form of organization. After I spend the afternoon sorting out his filing system and recompiling the list, at the end of the day I get fired. I found out later he was known in the industry to throw people under the bus at every opportunity. I was confident that I had accurately recorded what he wrote, but that he couldn't be bothered auditing his own records. Primary lesson learned: some people can't be trusted. Until proven otherwise, don't. Secondary lessons learned: double-check your work. Don't dispose of any information which might vindicate you. I was glad to read that obit, story 24. In the start of my career, I worked as a stylist and personal shopper for a luxury business. One day when leaving work, I saw one of our regular clients and her husband waiting for a taxi with weekend bags looking very loved up. I was in a rush, so didn't stop, and they didn't see me. A few days later, they came into store and I said, I saw on Friday looked like you were going away for the weekend. Did you have a nice time? The husband looked confused and his wife turned pale. Clueless, I continued. You had weekend bags, so assuming you went somewhere nice? The husband looked at his wife enraged. He'd been working away all weekend and finally caught his wife in the affair he suspected her of having. I felt absolutely sick. They both stormed out, and he returned later and asked me lots of questions, and I answered honestly against the advice of my manager. He separated from his wife and came back a few months later and got me a spa voucher to say thank you. I was a bubbly, clueless 22-year-old trying to make conversation, but I still curl up at the memory. And it was over a decade ago. Story 25. Been in the print industry since I was 17. I'm in my 50s. Last year, I accidentally left a meter-long metal ruler under the brand new blade of the guillotine. Totaled the blade. They're worth about $1,000. It had been put on the day before and came off the day I flecked it and had to be replaced. In my defense, I haven't been formally trained in a guillotine and hadn't used one for ages when this happened. I had only started the job a week earlier. They sent me home mostly because I was so upset. The next day, the boss called me into the office and I thought, here we go. But he just wanted to make sure I was okay and wasn't cross because the production supervisor had been training me, and it was his decision to put me on the guile. I ended up leaving after a month when I got poached by my previous employer. I don't burn bridges and made sure to leave on good terms and thank them for the opportunity. If I'd been working under a tradesman at the time, he'd have rightfully lost his crap. It was a rookie error. Story 26. I can't say too much without essentially doxing myself, but I do a very niche role, and in this role, there is one thing that must be done. The old, you had one job thing. And even though it wasn't my fault, it was my responsibility that the thing wasn't done by the hard deadline. I was actually in the process of interviewing for another role, which I got. So I could have just left without doing anything, but had it not been fixed, there could have been layoffs. It was that bad. So it was 6 weeks of hustle, dealing with a state government department that will not accept things post-deadline. The people in that department were actually on my side, but their legal department were being idiots. It was literally my second to last day when they reached out to say they were accepting it. I then organized a call with the internal department involved and put them on ducking blast. Lots of apologies and a gift sent. The department manager went banta at those involved, but it was wretched. Even though it's all fixed and it's been 2 years plus, I still get the shudders. Story 27. Wasn't my duck up, but someone tried to pin it on me. I work in the gambling industry, and for the longest time, I installed poker machine. We were installing 4 new machines, the first time these machines had been installed anywhere in Australia. As part of the install, you have to install the player loyalty systems. Part of it is a card reader. The old way these card readers were installed was to drill 3 holes into the chassis of the machine, and once the card readers are installed, it covers these holes. We got the machines up on the bases and bolted down. I duck out to my car to get some CATS cables, come back, and one of the guys has drilled 3 10mm holes into 3 of the machines with no discussion with the lead technician running the job. Turns out these machines have predetermined receptacles with plates that the card readers get mounted to. The company got stung for 3 new machines at $45K apiece because these holes made them illegal because of potential access into the machine. The guy that drilled the holes didn't last at the company long. Story 28 was a young journalist in my first 6 months of work. Writing a story on a karate champion, and a sub-editor asked me to fill out some space to make the story fit the page better. Saw the dojo was Kong first name, last name, Karate Academy, and had some quotes from the current sensei, and went with calling them sensei. First last name in the copy without double checking it. Karate champion called me up the next week to say the story was great, but I hadn't talked to sensei first name, last name, as he'd been passed for 5 years. Painful lesson, but a good one to learn about, confirming everyone involved beforehand. Story 29. I was fiddling with a new database query, ran it, went to have dinner, and never came back to it. Got a call the following morning from the head business performance, reporting asking if I'd set up the query and if I'd run it before. They advised me that I had the servers operating at 100% load for 14 hours trying to load 30B records, thanks row-num partition statement, and I had essentially taken down the primary reporting tool for the entire business and impacting month-end reporting. They were able to kill the query, install a timed kill switch, and gradually reload all the data. Surprisingly, this was not the first time it had happened, and it had taken multiple similar duck-ups to finally install a safeguard. Story 30. I took an entire bank offline and almost erased all their servers. I accidentally dropped a rebuild job at the top of the tree, which, if I hadn't killed in time, would have basically re-imaged every Windows server in the place. I worked it out in the short time between all the servers rebooting and the image reload starting. Story 31. While building a dashboard to read out the company's timesheets and make all the employees a bit more accountable, my only way to interact with the DB was raw SQL command, which I at that time did not know. Having no one around to glean some training or even basic info from, I made the most N100B mistake in SQL. Select from the where and is all, so selecting all data in all tables in the entire system. Accounting records, employee records going 20 years back, timesheets, credit card expenses, the whole lot. The system was ancient and more of a, we're glad it still works, but we do not know how type thing. And about half an hour later, the email started flowing in. Can't upload mileage records for fleet cars, can't request vacation, cannot view my pay slips, but the best one, cannot enter timesheets. This was a 250-person company in the agency sphere. Everybody's worst part of the job was timesheets. It took more than 3 weeks to get that system back up and running. The dashboard was quietly canceled. Story 32, finance support role for an investment platform. We had a representative of one of our large clients call through requesting a relatively small 1 million investment switch. Sell out of stock A and buy stock B. Now, I swear I submitted the request via our system, and I'm still not sure exactly where it failed. Whether I forgot to confirm the request at a particular stage, or whether it was some other unidentifiable issue. But the crux of it is that in the 5 days it took for the client to notice, stock A had dropped in value 4%, and stock B had a 7 positive return. I'm sure you can do the math. The client was disadvantaged tens of thousands of dollars, which ultimately the company needed to compensate. I was never punished, although conveniently, an excuse was found for not supporting a pay rise or bonus that year. It led to a process change that ultimately stops these sort of issues occurring though. They are my employer even still. Story 33. One of my epic fails whilst being a carer in an aged care facility of 96 residents happened on a Sunday morning. I was on a break toasting my bagel for breakfast in the staff room. I hadn't noticed the plumes of smoke rising from the toaster as I was scrolling through my phone when suddenly there was a loud beeping sound. I looked up and realized I had burnt said bagel and was pissed as this was all I had brought to eat. Suddenly, the maintenance man flung the door open and grabbed the toaster, throwing it out of the window whilst I was apologizing profusely, and he said, "It's too late. They're on their way." 4 fire trucks arrived in less than 5 minutes, priority due to size of facility. And seconds later, there I was faced with a tall firefighter who announced over the radio to his colleagues, "We're okay. I've located the bagel bandit. OMG. So embarrassing, and my burnt breakfast cost my workplace $800 Australian dollars 9 years ago now, just to reset the fire alarm. Story 34. I got 2. Sent an email to the address it had told me to do to get access to a system. For some if-up reason, it actually went to the whole company, plus some outside our company, 3,000 odd people. Then they started replying, all asking why, and asking to be removed for the distribution list. By this stage, I was hyperventilating under my desk. The CEOs replied, all saying stop replying as all the executives were getting the message. Then, One of the head execs replied all to the EAs asking about a lunch meeting. So random. Then, the whole email system shut down because of all the emails. Second one was about 20 years ago, and I accidentally deleted the entire scheduling system in a Big Four consulting firm. Thankfully, it was able to restore it from the overnight backup, but I was ready to just pack my desk and leave. Story 35. I was trying to troubleshoot the covers on a newly built HV-rated UA truck that was getting sent for delivery the next day. I could hear a rubbing noise coming from somewhere in the tower, and I was trying to see if I could pinpoint where by operating the tower. I had done this many times before, but for some reason that day my attention drifted and I stopped paying attention to where the bucket and end of boom were. As I'm looking to see where the rubbing noise is coming from, I see the entire boom arm shutter, and I immediately thought, that's odd. Why is it doing that? Then I realized the bucket was pressing down on the cab of the truck, bent the roof in, and all the equipment on the roof was ducked. I stopped, shook my head, and went off to tell management my duck up. They weren't happy to say the least, but they didn't sack me. It was a character building and humbling experience that I will hold for life. Story 36. Worst that was noticed was when I accidentally wrote a change to a Lotus Notes file that replicated through the local mail server instead of a single mailbox. And we had to take the server offline for the afternoon and roll it back before it replicated to the other servers around the company and screwed up all the other inboxes. That was fairly early on, and thankfully there was no fallout from that either. Worse that somehow didn't go unnoticed was back when I was working my casual after-school job. I waltzed in for a shift one afternoon, said my hellos and whatnot like I normally did, got my directions for what department I would be in, and did my shift. And it wasn't until I went to take a quick break before knockoff that I checked the roster for upcoming shifts and saw that I was actually down to start that shift way earlier in the morning. It was never brought up, and I somehow still got paid for the full hours for that shift too. Story 37. Oh boy, here we go. Cracks fingers. Let me tell you a story of when I worked at a chicken farm. 800 R&M carting about 500 eggs on a huge trolley with racks. Went over a small incline edge and lost them all. After 30 mins of cleaning, no joke. Next trolley, I did it again. I was ready to pass then and there by the boss. Another story, I hit my finger in a sheet metal press. That was super gay. Second day on the job. One time my boss threatened to fire me at a car yard I worked at by offering positions to replace mine. I was happy to leave, so I got my mate a job in secret. It all backfired when he said the next day, "There's a new bloke starting today." I had to shake his hand like we were meeting for the first time. I dropped him off to work with me, but a few streets earlier, the boss became pretty suspicious after the fourth day. Story 38. Fell asleep at work when I was alone in the office and missed the team huddle. The night before, I went on a night out because one of my friends was inviting the city. Not a great idea on a Wednesday night. I used to work in a room by myself, and I was the only employee in the office. We had a shared building, but just rented out one room for office use. It was about 09:30 a.m., and I just fell asleep in my chair. I was still drunk. Woke up in my chair at about 10:30 and realized I missed the Teams huddle. Had some messages and missed calls from my boss. After I responded, she video called me on Teams, and I answered, and I was like, "I'm so sorry something came up, and I just forgot." The funny thing is, my job was very slow-paced, and nothing urgent ever came up. She was just like, "Oh, well, hope everything's okay." Then just carried on the day as usual. Story 39. Back in my security days, someone left alarms turned off for an asset worth 1.1 million for 60 hours. One person left it off as testing was going on, 4 shifts, and no one caught on till the supervisor rocked up Monday morning, and a staff member complained that they accidentally entered the restricted area, but the alarms didn't go off. It's a one-of-a-kind thing that's not replaceable. He was given a warning, and it was all back to business, as usual. Story 40. First day at a web design company, and they took my personal iPad to upload their beta apps to it. Before I realized what is happening, they are using it to screen share to the large office TV. They opened Chrome, and the last tab I had open is a full frontal nude pic of double junk that I was showing my friends the night before, broadcast to the whole office. Story 41. In my late 20s, I was a police officer working at a capital city police department. One evening, I was assigned along with dozens of officers to raid an addict house, which all went well with nobody hurt. Suspects detained, evidence collected, etc. I was designated evidence custodian and signed for large quantities of substances to transport back to the evidence room, which I dutifully performed. Later that morning, while concluding my night shift, dispatch called my mobile phone to tell me a citizen had turned in 2 kilos of substances, and my briefcase they found laying at the curb in front of their house. I realized it was left on top of my car when I drove away from the initial crime scene. I must have made it a couple of blocks before the case slid off. Well, I signed for the evidence from the citizen, added it into the police repository, and nothing further was said. Story 42. I got on a coworker's computer, drew a stick figure with a big junk, and set it as his background. Big laughs were had. He left it like that for a couple of days, and then his computer got swapped out for a new one. About 6 months later, one of the partners was having a meeting with a client, and the computer in the meeting room died. He went and got one of the spare computers, booted it up while connected to the projector, and the client was shown a stick figure with a big junk Story 43. I worked in employee and exec share plans. A colleague, instead of buying a couple 100,000 shares for a bank exec, sold his shares. Afterwards, the share price moved up and our company had to buy shares on market, which resulted in $200,000 hit to our company. As far as I know, insurance took care of the loss and our employee kept their job, Story 44. In my much younger years, when I was an apprentice mechanic at a dealership, the sales team sold a limited edition sports car, and I got handed the pre-sale inspection and fitting some accessories. Took it for a test drive and ended up going through a traffic chicane a little too fast, and the car ended up on its side, on the grass, out the front of a cop's house. Damage was pretty minimal, all things considered. Dealership told the buyer they found some issue with the engine, so it had to be replaced under warranty, but really, they sent it to a panel beater to get bodywork done. Story 45. I wired up something wrong, took literally half the runway lights of the airport I was working at, and they were forced to divert planes to other airports and lay on buses. Story 46. I was working alone in a video rental store, remember those? When a touring rock group came in and asked if they could film part of their music clip in there. It was a pretty slow morning, so I just said, why not? This group of 6 young lads, while remaining respectful, still managed to be quite disruptive. Of course, that was when customers started coming in and were kind of annoyed at the antics, dancing, running through the aisles, etc. Needless to say, the video clip made its debut about 2 weeks later, and within a day, the bosses were onto it. I was summarily fired, due mainly to privacy issues with the company's logo featuring in the clip. Pretty silly on my part because I enjoyed that job, but I did get to be in the clip for about 0.5 seconds at least. Story 47. One ASX-listed company I once worked for gave me very high-level access to their system, which included access to all purchasing and inventory systems. One day I was showing someone how to run a replenishment order for their small site. Not realizing I was logged into the whole business, I accidentally triggered a reorder for all the projects, past and present, and with one click of a button, created $6 million worth of purchase orders. Needless to say, the rest of the day was a panic-fueled exercise of reversing all the POs for each site. Thank Duck, it was a weekend, and had time to clean it up before anyone noticed. Story 48. I have 2 big cringy-worthy moments. I was looking to earn extra income, so I picked up waitressing for a few months. I have skinny toothpick arms, so carrying plates with drinks was very challenging. Plus, I wasn't trained properly on how to unload trays. It was Mother's Day, and I was delivering a tray of drinks to a family. As I unloaded the tray lost its balance and I spilt beer all over their grandma. If looks could kill, I wouldn't be here telling this story. Second story. I put the wrong time on an invitation to clients to attend our presentation, so they all showed up with no presenter there. I still cringe about it till this day when I think about the director coming over me in a panic asking why clients are there, but the presenter wasn't there. Story 49. Not a work story. I went to boys' Catholic school where we used to say "that's gay" constantly for anything negative. Probably said it about 10,000 times. It was stuck with me as a habit. Was at a university party. I can't remember what we were talking about, but I said "that's gay." A girl frowned and asked what I said. I repeated "that's gay," thinking she didn't hear me. She made no more comments. Minutes later, her girlfriend came in. I have never said it since. Story 50. I was working in the plant room of a supermarket doing some RCD inspections. I failed to realize that the RCDs I was about to trip were downstream of the UPS instead of upstream. So when I tripped these particular RCDs, I shut off all the registers in the supermarket downstairs. The store manager called me almost instantly. I turned the RCD back on, but it took what felt like forever, 5 to 7 minutes for the registers to turn back on and load up. I then went down to the registers, the store manager made an announcement, and everyone applauded me in jest. It was embarrassing but funny at the same time. Story 51. I had a job at Macca's. We had to change the fries in the fridge, and it was impossible to do so without taking the rack, which sat on top of the fry crates inside the fridge. So you had to take the rack out. The rack typically held small plastic bags with apple pies in them. Anyway, I pulled the rack out, which had a bag of apple pies on top, and as I lifted it up to put on top of the fryer, as so I could fill up the fry crate, the apple pie bag fell into the frying oil. Oil went everywhere. The plastic melted immediately. For the next 2 weeks, I was still finding green plastic bits in the basket of fries. Story 52. When I was much younger, I worked at a dollar store. One day I rang through 2 big sales. Normal sale would be $5 to $10. These were like $60 or $80 each. Both of these transactions, the EFTPOS machine asked for the code. Should have realized I pressed a wrong button there, but nope, stupid me, just rang it through for both of them. Turns out I pressed refund instead of payment. Lost the owner of the store a bit of cash, and it was not my first day. I'd been there for like 6 months, and I did it on 2 of the largest sale amounts I'd seen. I was so embarrassed. Felt like such a git. Story 53. I'm a sound engineer. Once I was mixing sound for a Catholic music convention. 100-odd Catholic music professionals, songwriters, musos, publishers, etc. They have a playlist of their music to use as background music. iTunes plays one song from it, then jumps back to my queue and plays The Lonely Island's Natalie's Rap. I don't sleep, mother ducker. Off that yak in Durban, doing 120 getting BJ. Damn, Natalie, you a crazy chick? You shut and do BJ. They noticed Story 54. Not me, but a coworker once cooked a pastry for lunch, and it caused a fire. They put it in the microwave, typed in 3 minutes, and went back to work. They forgot about it. The fire alarm went off, and we evacuated. The fireman came out and said the microwave caught fire as someone had a pastry set to cook for 30 minutes in the microwave. My coworker typed an extra 0 and forgot to check on it. The whole 4-story corporate building had to evacuate and stand outside for 2 hours. There was obviously some fire damage to our floor. Mostly just a broken microwave and significant smoke, though. Oh, and we received a 4K call-out bill from the fire department. Story 55. I was on a teleconference where a huge amount of people were being told they were going to be made redundant, and I needed to capture any questions that came through during the QA. This was pre-video meetings. Some colleagues had gathered near me to sing happy birthday to someone. I put myself on mute and sang along. Turns out I wasn't on mute after all. I thankfully got away with it, largely because it was teleconference and nobody else in my vicinity was on the call. Nobody ever said anything to me, but in a meeting a few weeks later, someone said, "Do you think we'll ever find out who the idiot was that sang happy birthday on the announcement call?" Story 56. Was a young kid years ago working on school holidays at a diesel mechanic place in Brisbane that worked on trucks mainly. The boys had removed the rocker cover and gave me some sandpaper to rub the inside of this area. Long story short, I accidentally dropped a big bit of sandpaper into the motor and couldn't get it out and didn't know what to do, so I said nothing and they put the motor back together and it seized. They were at a loss why the motor seized and I didn't say a word to anyone. They ended up having to do a complete rebuild of the motor. Worked out the life as a truck mechanic was not for me. Story 57. Won't say what product or how much exactly was lost, but basically I broke something that we had to use that shouldn't have been there in the first place. Got hidden from auditors as well. Was only there because they weren't following protocol and the place was still sort of under construction. Anyways, I broke it, told the boss above me, cleaned it, which I thought I did, but there was still stuff around. Next day, they found the stuff still around. Had to throw everything made out from the point it allegedly broke, and the boss above me made up a whole other story against me. I cried and lost my job. It was over $10,000 and under $15,000 loss at Story 58. I careened about my manager in a group chat she was in. Luckily managed to get out of it with a warning, but learned my lesson after that. Only ever Karen about people in person, never in chats or on email. Story 59. For me, it's a toss-up between when I checked and corrected a text file in Excel before loading it into an antique computer system that used fixed width columns with no error checking. Excel stripped the leading zeros and the load corrupted the claims processing engine of a health insurer. Fortunately, I had an amazing boss who saw this as a learning opportunity and helped me fix it. The one and only time in my life when I accidentally CC'd someone on an email, a performance management email. The two worked closely together. It was muscle memory, and I was exhausted, but nonetheless unforgivable. Pretty sure that guy hates me, and I can't blame him. Story 60. About 20 years ago, I was sitting with a colleague in the office of the CFO for the company. We did it support, and the CFO was talking about stuff they needed for the yearly, was bored off my tits. Being bored, I started to fidget with the back of the CFO's desktop computer and flicked the little voltage switch on the PSU. PSU promptly blew up and spat out black smoke all over me. CFO really appreciated it. I replaced the PSU in about 10 mins, but they still looked at me like I was drooling on their desk. Story 61. I taught another team how to use a CSV upload to do something they were doing manually. There was a field my team didn't use, but their team did, but the field wasn't configured properly, which I was unaware of as we didn't use it. Just before the end of the workday, someone from that team used the CSV upload, including that field. This took down the entire website, e-commerce company, until the tech team could figure out the issue and roll back. To be honest, I kind of think it was the tech team's fault for not configuring it properly in the first place, so I don't feel too bad. Story 62. When I was an apprentice painter doing work in a multi-million-dollar mansion, I stepped off a ladder and knocked over a $10 bucket of paint. Luckily, we had drop sheets down, but the paint still went through them and onto the carpet. Me and my boss were freaking out trying to clean it up, which we eventually managed to do. And luckily, by the end of the day, my boss was laughing about it. I really thought I was getting fired that day. Story 63. I got promoted to the project manager for a nationwide project in one of the big four banks, of which I had to report progress to the board of directors in person each month. My first meeting, I took a sip of hot chocolate from a mug in the boardroom, and someone made a very funny joke, to which I spat a mouthful of hot chocolate over a female board member who was wearing a beige dress suit thing and now had brown splotchy U all over it. She was not impressed. I kept my contract, but at the end of the project, I wasn't asked to renew for anything else. Oops. Story 64. I just got off a meeting with my big bosses in a big company where I couldn't say much because I forgot that there was a meeting and didn't prepare anything at all. I kept repeating the same thing in different ways, and I could see my boss' eyes go big, like, what's she yapping on about? And they did add things at the end. And I'm pretty new at the company, so this was the time to shine. I feel like crap at the moment. Right after the meeting, the bosses went into another room and were discussing something. I am pretty sure it's about me. I feel ducked up at the moment. Story 65. I used to design newspapers. I was completing a 75th anniversary edition for a local town, and on page 2, announcing the 75th edition with the town name, I spelled the town name wrong. To my defense, other people checked it was well, but yeah, I was mortified. Was in that town the other day presenting to a local group, and I told them about my screw-up. They all laughed along with me, thankfully, but then one of the other subs left the word damn on the front page headline of our main local regional paper. Noticed halfway through the 30,000-ish print run, literally stop press, and they had to start again. Story 66. Many years ago, as a lawyer in London, I had to get some advice from a partner in the Paris office. His accented English was hard to understand, but I got down what I thought he was saying, put it in an email, and sent it to the client. Anyway, at some future point, it got back to the French partner and he flipped his lid. I'd misunderstood, and acting on the advice I'd given would basically be criminal. And the CEO of one of the world's largest investment banks could be arrested if he entered France. Suffice to say, not a great day at the office. Story 67. At an old workplace, a CEO came into the business that resulted in multiple staff resigning. Almost 12 months from their start date, they hand in notice. Keeping things professional, I log into FB and send an inbox message to the tune of last resignation for a while to a friend in another department. That notification pop-up stayed in the bottom corner of her screen for almost the entire 10-minute presentation she did over shared screens during that meeting. Lesson learned. If your friends are hopeless with remembering passwords, they are probably auto-logged into their social media accounts on their work laptops. Story 68. Nearly got fired, along with a colleague, for not noticing and reporting a burst pipe that was off our security cameras on a very rainy night. It could have been a catastrophe, but the water drained down a hill into a drain and caused no damage. We'd otherwise had a great night stopping other issues and noticing problems before they got serious, and then arrived at work the next day seeing the irate client going through all of our several hundred cameras to see if the water was visible. It was not. We kept our jobs until we both quit a few weeks later. Story 69. Not mine, but we had a supplier for a technical service. This supplier company was okay, but quite unreliable. They would often have outages, and we just had to put up with it. On this one occasion, they must have been in flap during one of the said outages, and their support team sent an email to all their customers in the to field. Oh no. We could all now see the other customers for this company, and spent the rest of the afternoon replying to all with discussions on how crap they are and other suppliers we could potentially move it. Story 70. When I was a graduate, I was working on testing a traffic model and accidentally modified around 250K work in progress. In layman's term, within the software package, I intended to make a copy of a file, but instead, I made a shortcut to a file, played around with it, stuffed up, and thought I would reopen the original and start over. But to my surprise, the original was heavily modified. I absolutely shat a brick and basically went in tears to my boss's office. Thankfully, every night the company ran backups on all of its servers. Story 71, simply loading an overhead crane. Load was probably only 500 kilos. It was suspended, so I pulled down the load on my end and then let go. Obviously, the entire load then guided back up on their side, and he called me an idiot, an A because it almost took all his face off. I didn't refute it. I was a careless that didn't understand the proper procedures. Being called a stupid in anger by your supervisor shocks you into reality about your wrongs quickly. Lucky no one was hurt. I turned into one of their best workers after that. Story 72. I have minor duck-ups all the time, but I'm a minimum wage casual, so as soon as I'm off the clock, who cares? Also, if it makes you feel less bad about a duck-up, I was waiting for over an hour for a client today who then got annoyed at me for the 5 minutes I took to walk to the building from my car where I was parked, waiting for her for over an hour. So don't beat yourself up over being late. You could have been late and an a-hole. Story 73. Not me, but one of the techs who worked under me. Insulted customers. Told a woman on a site he wouldn't duck her. He did some other stupid stuff, mainly insulting and being rude to people. Worst one was when he shut down a Woolworths DC for several hours, when he pushed an emergency shutdown button in the main server room, 3 times no less, instead of the door release button. That was an expensive duck-up. Needless to say, he didn't last long after that. Story 74. Loaded an AI meeting transcriber on my personal phone. The AI started running a meeting in MS Teams with the government, who freaked out. That's the risk of using personal devices for work purposes. You authorize the software access to other emails in the fine print, and ultimately MS Teams, etc. It was instigated by others bringing me into MS meetings without my knowledge when the boss had told them not to. Government Reporting Authority complained, thinking it records their conversation. They're so incompetent. Careful loading AI software on personal devices when the boss hasn't issued you a work phone. Story 75. Just before shift change, we decided to change oil on a $2 million centrifugal diesel pump. We drained the oil and got the next shift to put the new oil in. I got the new oil, but it was in an UN-labeled oil drum and told the next shift to use that drum of oil. They put the UN-labeled drum of oil into the machine and started it up. The diesel pump seized almost instantly, and the oil turned to a hard jello substance. I accidentally told the next shift to put antifreeze into the diesel pump. Story 76. Sent an email asking the cute PR girl if she wanted to go to a gig with me. That's fine, right? Except I lost confidence just a minute later and went into full meltdown and sent another email saying something like, "Oh, duck, crap. Sorry, I'm such a ducking idiot." I still to this day have no idea what made me think to swear so much. Anyway, she responded saying she already had a partner, a girlfriend. This was about the 5th girl that I was into that was a lesbian or bi. Story 77. Rooting a brand new Beamer rim wasn't fun. $900. Having a 22-inch V rim fall off the trolley and smack my idiot manager's prized Ute QTR, and leaving what he thought was mule kick from someone and getting away with it, priceless. Accidentally leaving an RX Lexus in drive, but perfectly perched on an incline just before Christmas break. My mentor had a stupid habit of revving the jump-started vehicles before turning them off. Well, launched the Git Square into the back of an A4 Audi. They let it fly. Who you know, huh? There are many more. Story 78. I'm an addict. Early in my career of addiction, I showed up for work on a ton of substances. I also bring some beer to get me through. I also, in this frame of mind, thought it was perfectly acceptable to bring a friend also high to work. I was opening this day, and I actually lasted about 2 hours before a customer called the owner and had it shut down, and the branch closed for the day. That actually isn't probably my worst duck-up, but it's the one that comes to mind. Feel better. Story 79. This was a long time ago now, but back when I worked on the phones, I had a customer, insurance advisor, call the bank I was working for. I put them on hold to go ask my senior a question. I was only like 1 month into the job, and then 3 other people stopped me, and I forgot I was on the phone and went to lunch. They were still on the line when I came back. It ended up being the 2nd biggest business writer for the bank. I'm amazed I kept my job. Story 80. I'm an electrician in an industrial setting. One night I threw my ciggy butt in a plastic bin in another department's area. Needless to say, it caught a light and melted into a pile of mosh on the ground. If it had have gone right up, it could have potentially burnt down $1 million workshop, as there was no fire system in place. It was the most embarrassing and ashamed I've been in the workplace. I still think about it today, and it happened many years ago. I quit smoking ciggies because of it. What's the most you've ever ducked up at your job? Story 1. Not me, but another person, and not really a job, but a position that functions very much like a job. An upstairs neighbor decided to start volunteering with me at the animal shelter. This neighbor doesn't really give off nice vibes. He gives off more a-hole vibes, but he's not an a-hole. He just has anger issues and autism, and has a bit of a poor understanding of how to behave socially, making rude jokes in public, for example. We both worked the same shift in the same place, with the cats. All was fine until one week he and I went to the animal shelter, cleaned cat cages, same as usual, until he mentioned how a cat's litter box smelled. He has a very loud voice, and it wasn't like he kept quiet about it, but he didn't announce it to the entirety of the floor either. The next week, I found out he was laid off from his shift for such a comment, as the volunteer coordinator, our boss, said that working with cats probably wasn't right for him and he should try the dogs, or small animals instead. Someone apparently must have heard and tattled on him. He was understandably furious, but hasn't worked at the animal shelter since. Instead, working at an office for people with disabilities nearby and finding other employment. As I didn't make any comments, I agreed with him, but never outright said, "This potty is stinky," or anything like that. I remained in my shift and have remained ever since. In fact, I got promoted recently to the back end of the shelter where my antisocial ass can work in nearly happy solitude with cats. A lovely payoff. Should add that while I have made notes about how cats' litter boxes smell, I wasn't laid off from my position. Instead, I earned a promotion. Funny how that works. Story 2. Used to cook at an Italian restaurant. One day I was tasked with prepping hundreds of liters of pasta sauce for the oncoming dinner rush. The sauce gets mixed in a giant vat about 4 feet tall, 4 feet in diameter, and when it's all mixed, you just put a 10-liter bucket underneath the valve, open it to fill the bucket, then replace the bucket, and repeat until the vat is empty. Also, I feel like I should mention that the consumption of substances was pretty commonplace among most of the cooks I've worked with. So basically, one quick smoke break leads to some forgetfulness, which leads to the terrifying realization that I left in between switching buckets and didn't close the valve. So I run back into the kitchen to find the entire floor space covered in a 3-inch thick layer of pasta sauce and the vat completely empty, not even an hour before the dinner rush. I ended up cleaning it up, alone of course, and the rest of the night went on to be an absolute crap show, everything running behind schedule. Long story short, I got a long talking to and there was a bit of a crackdown on the substances consumption at work. I didn't get fired, but my boss did tell me, if you weren't a cook, we'd have probably let you go. But since you had to spend the rest of the day working in your own mess, I figured that's probably punishment enough. Story 3. Filed orders in a warehouse for a company that made baking products. I'd have to use a forklift in aisles that were about 6 to 8 foot across. Real tight fit. I'm saying all this for the story that isn't mine, but I witnessed. But back to my story for now. A pallet of donut glaze got one of the 5-gallon buckets of glaze busted all over it. I was sent through dock doors, the rolling type, to wash it off with a hose outside. Finish that up, then head back in only to heart a massive crunch. I had hit the dock door as it was automatically closing, something that no one bothered to tell me it would do. I was told it was about $60K in damage. Now back to why I bothered mentioning the aisles being real narrow. A dude was going to fill an order, grabs the pallet off the top row, and goes to pull out. He forgot that you had to slowly pull the pallet halfway off, drop out, then come in at an angle to actually get it out. Dude just came straight backwards, knocking about 6 of those massive warehouse shelves over like dominoes. There was donut glaze, cherry topping, whipped cream everywhere. Took a few days off cleaning to actually get rid of it all. I'm fairly sure the guy was just in a rush because he got off the same time I did, but he had 15 minutes to finish his last order. I dipped as soon as I saw the damage. No way in hell was I staying over dealing with that. Story 4. Not ducked, but almost. In my job, every storage server are encrypted with very long and complex password. After a reboot, each server need to type passwords to boot. To remember all these, we have a password manager with all the passwords in it. Having said that, one night after a long day, moving all the servers to a new location, it was time to start all over again. When the first servers start booting, I remembered that the password manager was inside one of the now powered off servers. All the company information was in those servers. Even the backups were encrypted. At that moment, I think my heart stopped for a few seconds. Started to feel cold sweat and feel nausea. I freaked out. One coworker was with me at that time and asked me what was going on. Not answered, just thinking how not to take a medium-sized company to bankrupt because of me. My coworker asked again, and in all shame, I told him the situation. Not a single duck was given. So I asked why, and in all serenity, he pointed to a USB stick, which I made and complete forgot about, with a portable version of the password manager, with a minimal set of passwords able to start all again. Never ever feel so bad and nervous in my life. Sorry about my English, not my native language. Story 5. Working at a care home job as a temporary kitchen porter during the summer, I accidentally broke the hot trolley that kept residents' dishes warm as I was delivering it to their room. In my defense, the hot trolley could only be pushed by 2 people, and my colleague couldn't help me at the time as he was busy. I then got yelled at by a bossy higher-up for standing around with it, and you got punished if you answered back to her, so I had to push it back to the kitchen, and hence why it broke, proving them why one person couldn't do it. Damned if you do, damned if you don't, that kind of thing. I still got told off by my department manager, however, and was lucky to avoid a blocking from the care home manager for that. That was probably one of the things that made my department manager eventually let me go along with many other reasons. To be fair, I was pretty incompetent most of the time, but by that time I'd done enough to earn enough money to quit anyway. You could just never win with them at that job, and I'm glad I got the hell out of there. I believe it cost them around $300 for them to replace the hot trolley. Story 6. Went out drinking with my general manager. Got a text from the cleaners that there was a leak. In my drunken state, I sent the message back, "That sounds like a problem for tomorrow me," rolled up at 8 a.m. to a flooded furniture store, thousands of dollars of damage to the showroom, and over $100K worth of merchandise water damaged. We managed to get the insurance company to cover it, but boy did I feel stupid. My GM and I hid the fact that we knew. He was so hungover he couldn't make it to work, even after we found out about the flood story 7. When I was a doctor in primary care, I was treating a kid for behavioral problem. I prescribed some stimulants for him and saw him in follow-up. After reviewing reports from his teachers and parents, the stimulants were unmasking some tics. Seemed like the kid may have a tic disorder like Tourette's. I called a neurologist and ran the case, but she agreed with the diagnosis of tic disorder. Because the wait list to see the specialist was several months, she recommended I start the kid on meds and follow up with him again. I start him on a new medication dose, escalating over a few days, and then head off for 10-day vacation, planning to see him when I get back. I get back to frantic calls from the mom and my partners. Apparently, I had misordered the medication dosage, supposed to be MCG, not MG. I had overdosed this kid on the medication, he was groggy, then hallucinating. My colleagues caught and corrected the error. I was so nervous to see the family in follow-up. When they came, the mom gave me a huge hug. This medicine worked, well, after the overdose thing, she said. She was thrilled that he was back to his old self and was getting better reports from School Story 8. Used to be a helicopter mechanic in the Army. Bear with me for the preface. The rotor heads are, surprisingly, held on with a single nut. On a Chaise 47, it gets torqued to about 5,500 pounds. This requires a device called a torque pack, which is just a series of reduction gears in an enclosure the size of a toaster oven. It hooks onto the rotor head, and you use a handle to crank it for like 20 minutes while watching a gauge slowly increase to the correct torque. One very long night, I was installing a rotor head and noticed that it was taking longer than usual for torque to increase. Thinking that it was just a side effect of my tired state, I kept on. After a very long time, not getting above 2K, I finally noticed it. The torque pack was hooked up in the uninstall position. I was still turning the handle to tighten, so basically the whole torque pack had slowly rotated until the backs of the metal connection hooks were gouging their way through the arms of the rotor head. Certainly an oh damn moment. You can image the cost of a Boeing rotor head with expedited shipping to a war zone. Story 9. I worked at a TV station, and one of my jobs was loading the tape and to record the evening news promo, then cueing it to play in whatever afternoon commercial break it was scheduled. While we were getting ready to film the promo, the news director got on the intercom and started telling me about how the guy on shift yesterday forgot to load the tape. He just hit record on the empty machine and let it go. Didn't realize until he went to cue it, and there wasn't anything there. By then, the crew and anchor had dispersed. They had to get them all back in the studio for a redo. We all had a good laugh at his stupidity and recorded the promo. After we were wrapped, I looked over at the machine. There was no tape in it. Story 10. Used to work for a guy with handyman in the business name. We did a lot of that type of work. Unclogging drains, painting, cleaning gutters. The boss decided to take on a job building a pavilion-type building with huge stone pillars. Well, the stones show up on a semi-truck, and those pallets were heavy. Way too heavy for our loader, so we were down stacking the pallets. I thought it was light enough, but I was wrong. I lifted the forks, and as soon as the pallet was clear of the semi-truck bed, the whole machine I was in flipped straight over on its face. Smashed the front end real bad from landing on the pallet of stones, bent the forks on the forklift. I also ducked up the side of the semi-truck. Lots of damage. Luckily, I was okay. I had a seatbelt on that gave me a huge bruise from when it caught me. I never drove any of his equipment again. He was very nice. I didn't even get fired. I just never lived down being the guy that flipped the loader. Story 11. My first job, and I was running a cash register. Didn't know that best practice is to put larger bills underneath. I was giving change and accidentally gave away $100 thinking it was $1. Thankfully, that person came back and returned the 100. Angels do exist. Story 12. Was working at a fast food counter, was very new to the job, and it was my first job, and had to change out the bag in the juice machine. Take out the empty bag, put in a full one. Basically, I cut the little plastic thing for the juice to come out of too short, and juice wouldn't stop pouring out. Keep in mind now, I also have a customer out front, so I'm trying to change it out as quickly as possible. I run in the back of the kitchen to grab someone who knows how to fix it. As I run back out with them, I slip on the juice and land right on my ass in a puddle of orange juice. Got up straight away and later got a new uniform for the rest of the day. In the moment, it was super embarrassing. But looking back at it now, if there wasn't anyone there at the counter, I probably would have started laughing my ass off. Story 13. When I was in high school, I had a part-time job with my uncle and cousins painting apartments and dorm rooms on a college campus. One time while on the job, I accidentally spilled an entire can of white paint on a freshly paved blacktop parking lot. But no one was there to witness what I had done. To avoid getting fired, I never confessed to spilling the paint. My uncle was furious and asked around. They never knew that I was the one responsible. And secondly, one time I was assigned to paint an entire apartment. My only job was to paint the walls, but I must have spaced out and I ended up painting the ceilings. My cousin walked in and was like, what are you doing? I was like, I'm painting. He responded, we're not supposed to paint the ceilings. I felt so stupid. Shortly after, I quit the job because I was getting the vibe that the owner of the company absolutely hated me. Story 14. Couple jobs ago, I was working on the PBX in the telco closet when the alarm started going off for the Clean Guard suppression system. Don't know why, but my vendor installed the abort button in the room. Did my server room this way too. Instinct says GTFO now, but crap, there's no fire. Damn, hit the abort button. First thing I saw was the pull handle that immediately releases the system and instinctively pulled it. God damn it. JPG. Gas starts rolling out from under the door and it's tied into my main panel so the alarm goes off. FD shows up in full kit before the alarm company even calls me to report the alarm. Icing on the cake is the pull handle. Didn't use a typical hex wrench to reset, so the FD didn't have the tool to reset it. I spent 30 minutes trying to jimmy the ducker open to kill the alarm with the FD guys just looking at me like I was an idiot. Story 15. I was working as a personal care assistant. I don't have medical training, so I shouldn't be giving meds to anyone. But my employer said that it's okay because the meds came from pharmacy, pre-divided into morning, day, afternoon, and evening meds. All I had to do was give pills from correct sealed bag. One morning I gave evening meds instead of morning meds. It was very quiet morning and day, and people with actual healthcare training needed to check the patient. Luckily, nothing serious happened to the patient because of this. She just slept most of the day. I didn't get disciplined or yelled at because everyone knew I shouldn't be giving meds without medical training. I changed professions sometime after that. Story 16. Used to work in a substances manufacturing facility. During a maintenance event with 25 servers and 300 or so high-end terminals being rebooted, I failed to check one of the servers. It was the building management system, which amongst other things recorded the temperatures in the storage freezers. The server came back online, but the service didn't. Better monitoring was put in place afterward. The next day, one of the techs doing part of their job noticed the temperature values were null for the previous night. 15 million worth of substances compound had to be retested for efficacy and safety. How did I keep my job? Owned the mistake and took every possible action to ensure it could not happen again to myself or anyone else. If any of the substances had tested negative, I'd probably have been crap canned. Deservedly so. Story 17. I trusted college student. I ran a national college peer-to-peer reproductive health education program. In the program, I ran college groups could apply for funding to organize events. This group in question applied with a proposal of taking a group of students to a clinic where they would watch a medical provider insert and bud into a papaya to demystify the procedure. Sounds great. Approved. Turns out they did buy papayas, but they took them to the steps of a Catholic church. They called the media to and loudly proclaimed that my organization gave them the money to do so. I wasn't fired, but it came close to it. I'll never trust the youth again. Story 18. I worked at a winery and had to drive the customers to their cars when they were done. I drove a little golf cart. One day, these drunk customers wanted me to whip the golf cart, so being the people pleaser I am, I did donuts and drifted every turn. I ended up putting the golf cart on 2 wheels right in front of the boss. Let's just say I don't get to drive the golf cart anymore. Story 19. So I worked as a custodian at a really old high school that's being torn down soon. I would do mostly summer work, and that would involve a lot of outdoor jobs like cutting grass and trimming plants. One day I was trimming a hedge, one that I had trimmed many times before, mind you, with electric trimmers, and out of nowhere, I thought I had been shot in the neck. I dropped the trimmers and ran like the goddamn wind as the hundreds of hornets from the huge ducking nest I'd cut open started to chase me. Thank God the truck door was open because I managed to shut it a millisecond before they would have gotten in. Scariest moment at work by far. Story 20. I worked at a Mediterranean place once, and I was asked to replace a soda syrup bag by the end of my shift. I had never done so, but I just got the box with the bag and figured it out. I opened the box with a knife, put the new bag in, and closed up. I was off the next day, but after I was told that I stabbed the bag and all the syrup had drained out during the night, and by the time the morning staff got there, the floor was all sticky. Apparently, they spent 2 hours cleaning. The manager didn't fire me, but I was charged $70 for the bag. Story 21. First job. Slipped on ice while carrying a huge bucket full of ice to refill the soda machine. Fell flat on my back while the ice covered me like the opening to Encino Man. Current job. Was busy talking to a friendly and sweet grandma while I drew up her grandson's IV Benadryl. Pushed it into his IV. A minute later, he had a seizure. I gave him 4 times the normal dose by accident, having drawn up the whole vial while distracted. It was 12 years ago, and I think of it every day. He was fine, but now when I'm giving medications, I don't allow any distraction. Story 22. I'm an accounting assistant. In my first year, I was releasing a container for a client, and I had to pay a tax for the merchandise. The client didn't change the currency to dollars, and I didn't notice, so I paid about $33,000 more than I should have. The business hadn't started yet. They were setting up the store, doing repairs, and buying the first merchandise, and I was told I blew their renovation budget. Luckily, the store opened with no problems a few months later, and all of that amount was kept as credit, so they didn't have to pay sales taxes for a few months until they used up that credit. Story 23. I was in the drive-thru and a lady gave me a $10 bill, but I pointed down as $100 and gave her way too much money back. She even tried to explain to me that I gave her too much, but I was really tired that day and it just didn't click in my head what was going on. She flat out said that I gave her too much money, but it's like I couldn't understand English for a second. I was so lost. Luckily, my bosses never found out, but man, I was scared I was going to get fired. Story 24. I just quit my job and I already regret it. I quit to give back to school. I have 2 small children and didn't want to be working and going to school because of time lost with them. My job was very emotionally draining and I didn't want to potentially take that out on my kids. Now I'm worried that the emotions of not knowing what's coming next will be too much. I called HR and they said, while my old school is staffed since my resignation, they could definitely get me interviews because I'm very marketable. Story 25. Working on the checkouts. A couple's shopping came to $45. They wanted £50 cash back. I entered the cash back as if they were paying with cash, then told them to insert their card. The way it worked out was that they paid $5 for a $45 shop, plus I gave them the £50 cash back without them paying with their card to get it. So basically, they only got charged $5 for a big shop, and I gave them £50 for free. The boss wasn't that happy. Story 26. Not that bad, but I was making wings at a sports bar and I put them in the wrong sauce. So I had to remake them, took 11 minutes, then put the right sauce on them. Then they came back because the sauce was supposed to be on the side. So I had to make more, 11 more mins. And when they were almost done, I was told that they were now a to-go order. The person got tired of waiting for their food and just wanted to leave. Felt really bad after. Story 27. I left about 1.5 foot of dead-length 2-mile nylon sitting out the back of a CNC lathe and fired it up to $4,000. Wondered why it was making such an odd noise until what sounded like a small explosion as the nylon broke off and hit the floor, ricocheting off and getting at least 30 feet of air. Everyone was looking around until that piece of nylon came back down a few seconds later. No injuries, no damage, no reprimand. One hell of a lesson learned. Story 28. I'm a welder. One time I struck a 225 amp arc on a 70-18 rod with my helmet still on top of my head. For all you non-welders out there, that's an electric arc powerful enough to melt WAHAV and steel plates together. So really bright. I got such bad flash burn in my eyes, I couldn't really see anything for a day or two, and my eyes hurt really bad the whole time. Story 29. I detailed cars at the end of high school and beginning of college. First semester back from college, I took a few shots at work during my 30-minute lunch break. Came back to work and was helping with the car wash since there were no details. Pulled a car into a vacuuming lane and hopped out without putting it into park first. Car goes rolling into the customer's car in front of it, and both customers see the whole thing. Somehow, I didn't get fired. Story 30. I melted a few $100s worth of dilly bars, apparently. There was no alarm on the freezer up front, and it was left open a crack because it didn't seal right. I was closing up front, so they blamed 16-year-old me that was working there for 3 weeks at that point. Apparently that happened often enough, and they were used to it, so they didn't make the person up front pay for it whenever it did. I still felt really bad though. Story 31. Worked in a Cheerios factory. They're supposed to be nut-free because of allergies, but someone loaded a ton of Honey Nut Cheerios into the regular Cheerios system. Factory shut down, all product discarded. I think it took a 3 or 4 day deep clean before production could start again. Story 32. Not me, but my aunt was a waitress, and some duchess and duke of whatever entered, and were all regal and pompous. They ordered wine and a posh curry each. She was walking towards the table, but didn't see a kid high on Coca-Cola crawling around, tripped over him, and sent the stuff flying into the couple. They were distraught and left. Fired was an understatement. Story 33 was a guy who accidentally deleted his company's entire production code base on his first day. For those not familiar, for a software company, there are multiple code bases. Production is the code currently offered to the public, meaning this guy effectively deleted his company's entire product. Story 34. I worked at a fuel dock in Newport Beach, K. I accidentally put about 400 gallons of diesel into a boat that took gasoline. The guy was actually incredibly cool about it, but it was one of the biggest duck moments of my life when I realized his giant boat didn't take diesel. Apparently, You can run gas up to some level of mixture in a diesel engine without creating damage. Story 35. Come 4 hours too late on the first day, all the while being new and working slow and in need of constant help. Still got the job, and it's going very well. And as a bonus now, I have money I can use. Not like I have anything I want, so I'll have absolutely no use for the stuff. So yeah, I'm working because I'm bored. I regret nothing. Story 36. At my kennel job, I accidentally let 2 dogs that didn't like each other out in the yard together. One was a pit bull, and he almost killed the other dog. Worst day ever. I still feel guilty. I once confused the airlock release button with the emergency button at a lab job. I did not last long. Story 37. I accidentally started a fire that turned into a jet flamethrower and roasted the main power cables supplying one production area. I work in a refinery. Total cost of repair and lost production was around $600,000. Surprisingly, I still work there. Story 38. A very, very long time ago, in my second job working at a gold refinery lab in the 80s, I managed to crash the lab computer so epically it had to have a specialist come in to fix it. One of those huge old things, like a stranded tank with green text on a tiny monitor. I wasn't allowed near it again. Story 39. Accepted 20 fake 100 bills. Management didn't blame me though, since they never actually taught me how to spot fakes. After that incident, I always made sure that when I was training new people, I told them the story and taught them how to spot fakes. Story 40. Ran a query on our database, which locked a table that literally everything needed access to. Brought the website down for 5 minutes before someone noticed. About a year after that, I accidentally opted out every customer we had from every single email. Order confirmations, important communications, everything. Those were 2 very bad days at the office. What's the biggest mistake you've made at work? Story 1. We provide a SaaS product to our clients as part of our services. We get said SaaS from a VAR that we have worked with for years. The product has never been great, but with what the VAR can do with it, it makes it a very appealing product from a margin perspective. Recently though, the vendor the VR uses has become unstable and the product has become less appealing. Then, a junior-ass AM decided to blame some operational deficiencies on the SaaS in a client meeting, which got the client all spun up about switching platforms. Our VAR came back and said they were going to build their own platform and it would be ready to demo over the summer. At the same time though, unbeknownst to the VAR, we were exploring a completely different platform from an old colleague, which was ready to go now. The VAR was doing some optimization work one weekend and ducked up on a migration that left the SaaS product down on Monday morning. The team then called the VAR at like 0500, repeatedly trying to get the system working. They got it back up and running and then decided to call one of our partners and Karen'd him out for having the team blow up their phone. Of course, the client was well aware of the outage, which just exacerbated their existing freakout. And they also called the partner. The partner then calls me and says, we need to expedite the platform migration as the client is getting flighty. I ask if we want to wait for the VAR's new offering or go with the old colleagues, and the partner said, A, we can't wait for the VAR, and B, he was a giant junk on the phone, and duck him for being that way, when it was his mistake that caused the issue. I reach out to our old colleague and get a demo set up for the client of their system. The client then hits me up and asks for a detailed list of issues with the existing system so they can meet internally prior to the demo and understand what is important to them. I only know of the issues I have been told about and have no real idea what they are talking about outside of the migration outage and a few very minor bugs. Clearly, the junior-ass AM had been blaming a ton of crap on the SaaS product. Here's the thing about the VAR. He is a good guy, although sometimes a bit aloof when it comes to support, and he can be quite cranky, like the phone call. But I like him. And the modules he and his company have built for the platform have allowed us to use something that would otherwise cost many times what an off-the-shelf solution would, like eye-watering margin. I have had many sales reps from other vendors call me and tell me they can beat my current price, and I politely tell them what we are paying and most end the call there. Impossible to compete with this price point. So, having worked with this guy for a long time, and him being really excited to use us to test his new product, makes what I did feel so much worse. So when the client shot me a message asking for documentation for all the issues in preparation for the demo, I was a bit peeved since this was clearly something the AM created. And I hate sounding like an idiot trying to talk about crap I am out of the loop on. Without thinking, I copy and paste the client's message to me into a chat with the AM and the VAR. Seconds later, I realized what I did and went to edit the message just to see the VAR was already responding and had clearly seen it. First thing he says, "Hey, what demo are they talking about? This is our new product, right? It won't be ready for a bit." Huge pit in my stomach. Not only was it a major blow to our personal relationship, but we needed him to cooperate until any platform change was made. I immediately call one of the other partners that isn't on the VR hate train and explain what I did. He told me to diplomat my way out of it, which I did, but it felt super crafty. The VAR didn't respond to my message, but instead came back like 2 hours later and only talked to the AIM about fixing all the issues. Story 2. Every morning I would start the iced tea machine so I could have some at lunch. It was commercial size that you would see at a restaurant. One morning I did the usual and walked away. Well, it turns out the cleaning lady left the spigot open, so it would drain overnight and I did not notice. Turns out the first people to stumble upon the 15 gallons of hot water on the ground/counter was the CEO, CFO, and VP. There was an investor meeting and the board was coming in, so the C-suite had to clean it up as quick as possible. I didn't find out until the end of the day. No one knew it was me, but damn. I still remember going into the break room at lunch and thinking, "Duck who drank all my tea." Story 3. There have been many instances I made a mistake that's gone to the client. Sometimes it's missing information, others it's a calculation error in a model. But generally the client is understanding about this. Only recently, I put together a slide 20 minutes before a meeting, which was misleading. Context is that this was the first meeting with the head of the division for 2 weeks, as he has been out for family medical reasons. We were meeting to discuss a draft pack going to the executive level. I put together a slide with indicative numbers, but he misinterpreted them as near final, despite a very large tag on the slide saying they were highly indicative. And he started jumping to conclusions and was unhappy when he realized that they were not yet the right conclusions to be drawn. His colleagues started to get a blocking. At that point, I had to interrupt to say it was my fault and that I should take the blame for the miscommunication. In the end, I know I did the right thing in the end. They actually had a constructive discussion, partly as a consequence of showing the slide with numbers. Now I've had a career for over 20 years, so I'm a little thick-skinned. But as a freelance consultant, I also know some other things. Any project I work on might be my very last as a freelancer if I make a serious mistake in my job. I don't have the cover of a big brand firm behind me. 2, we're all humans and we make mistakes. 3, most clients are understanding of human error. It's your attitude that counts more than anything. 4, it's better to be honest with your client and build trust than to be evasive or even worse, lie. 5, that honesty and trust will build long-term relationships even if it isn't obvious immediately. 6, there are very few mistakes that are catastrophic and can't be recovered. We'll all make mistakes. I'm sure I'll make another one at some point. Around 300,000 cells in a spreadsheet has a mistake in it, or something like that. Hope you don't get eaten up too much by it. Use this as experience, take the positives, and move on. Story 4. I once showed up to a client's office and told the front desk that I was there to see woman with unique name. The office person looked confused and walked away. Once she did, I realized that woman with unique name was a different client and not the person I was there to see. I felt like a total idiot, but it was even worse when the front desk person returned with a woman who just so happened to have that same name. She was a board member of the company I was actually at. Story 5. As a first-year analyst, was trusted to support 4 concurrent work streams and had my head on fire at all times. I didn't question the numbers a director gave me, and I didn't know that 2 cost savings buckets were just different names for one after-team review of my waterfall. The numbers were put in front of the client. After the client presentation, someone realized the mistake, and the senior director on the project said he wanted to kill me and made a strangling motion with his hands, having previously made a couple smaller mistakes on the project BC. I didn't know how to check my work. Definitely my fault, but I partially blame lack of training and lack of oversight by the team. I got rolled off my career several years later as fine, but I felt like it was the end of the world. Looking back, it was single-handedly one of the most educational moments of my career regarding how to check work, build in processes to avoid errors, etc. I also realized why my firm had a 95% plus voluntary attrition rate. Story 6. I know someone that made an error in one of the internal planning models, which impacted total projected cost. Won't get into details, but their mistake had a 1-2 million impact. Trust me, however big of a mistake you think you made, someone has made a bigger one. Story 7. The miscalculation of my intern led to the firing of the logistics VP. We showed the CEO and CFO an analysis with a suggestion to build a new warehouse ASAP, as in 2005 years their warehouse would be a max capacity. The logistics VP was fully against it. It was a full-on fight for 2 months or so. Our analysis was well-based, and we did a lot of projects in the past with lots of success. The approach was right and all the assumptions were right. However, it turns out that my intern did an Excel mistake and added 2 things instead of deducting it. With the correction, it turned out that the max capacity will be reached in 5 years, I was quite young and went to my project management partner. Both decided that we shouldn't do anything about it. The logistics VP was fired by the end of the month. The company started to build a new, fully automatized warehouse. The mistake was never noticed. Due to Corona, many of the stock shortages made it impossible to track. Story 8. Not me, but I worked at a job 5 or so years ago where the director was responsible for owning a budgetary model. 7-tab behemoth with formulas crisscrossing across pages, hard-coded values, inconsistent formulas and columns. You name it, it was in there. He eventually got fired, and a new director and I, a senior at the time, was brought in. New guy's first task for me is to review the model and make sense of it. I spent 2 40-hour weeks combing through the logic, even building flowcharts to explain it, and dummy models to explain it, only to realize no matter what you put into it, it was just going to give the maximum allowable value because of an Excel formula error, like 40% through the calculation flow. Crap resulted in overshoot of expected revenues of nearly $50 and expenses of like 55 million. Story 9. Accidentally let an ex-employee, I work admin reception, in to meet the coup. Completely forgot he got axed. He traveled over 500 miles to see him and his badge still worked too. Don't know why his badge wasn't confiscated. It was a friendly meeting, but nobody trusted him and was eventually escorted out. Man ambushed the front and acted like any other agent I've worked with there. Lost my crap when I found out that I'd accidentally let him in and still feel bad about it. To be fair, I had warned management about too much crap being piled on me at the front desk a month before, since I doubled as admin and was trying to get the roles separated because I could see this from a mile away. I apologized directly to the TOU for the mistake. It was received in an okay way, but I'm still upset. Story 10. Was supposed to lead a meeting with several very senior stakeholders in a different country, everyone flying in. I was the only one comfortable with those people. It was spring and I have pretty bad allergies. Didn't know it was going to be worse on that specific country. I woke up with my eyes glued shut and all face puffed. Took forever to unglue them. Everyone was calling me, but it was on silence mode as always, and I could not see. They already started the wasting this time for these people cost X amount of money, and we were about to sign in a few more million. I arrived 30 minutes later, looking as round as the moon, and joked that my cheek would not let me put my phone on my ear. Paid for dinner later that day, we still got the deal. Story 11. Is this some kind of generational thing? I've never seen so many people who become distraught over making one mistake at work. See posts like this on a daily basis now. Do you realize that unless you are the CEO of the company or a senior executive, that you're expected to make mistakes every now and then? It's your job to learn from them. That's the whole point of hiring inexperienced people into entry-level positions. You take feedback and improve. The company is investing in you for the future, not for the present every second of every day. If you were expected to be perfection, why wouldn't these companies put you straight into the C-suite out of college, for crying out loud? Story 12. Was in industry and regularly made 25K, 30K duck-ups because I was not paying attention or wanted to go home before 7 p.m. It just so happened that I was managing some pretty critical supply chain decisions for a $2 billion business on my own with little oversight, and the spend was basically noise that could be blamed on bad forecasts. Goes to show that what consultants consider important is only because of the expectations that you place on yourselves or some a whole client places. Odds are your clients just want to go home and see their kid's baseball game and don't care about your duck-ups as much as you think they do. Story 13. I worked it before transitioning to consulting. During my time, a colleague got a call where an associate director had spilled water on her laptop. I don't know what crazy bullcrap version control system her team was running, but it turned out that the majority of work on a 6+ month audit was stored on that laptop and that laptop alone. She was let go. Don't know how much it cost, but easily it was thousands of chargeable hours. Story 14. When I was a systems analyst at a property management company, we were changing revenue accounts for the tenant monthly billing on parking fees or something. I was supposed to put an end date on all the scheduled charges to the old revenue account and add a new record for the new revenue account. I uploaded my files in prod, containing only the charges with the end dates and the new charges instead of running in test first, and found out the hard way that the ETL tool for the ERP didn't add records. It would delete them all and replace them. This happened on the last day of my 2-week notice at that company. Story 15. 300K overstatement of revenue. Yes, the financials got sent to the banker. Yes, the loan application renewal was put on hold. Got lucky in the fact that the company was such a garbage fire, and our team stretched so thin that there was nothing they could do to me except have me write a memo to the client explaining how the error occurred and why it could never happen in the future. Ended up retooling their revenue recognition process and restating the whole year anyway. and was able to boost the stated revenue by 500K, so the next set of financials showed 200K more than the first set did, and that was enough to keep the client happy. Story 16. When I worked at Popeyes during the pandemic, I was taking a lady's order, and when I gave her the cup, I picked it up by the top, where the people normally drink it from, instead of the bottom. Then she warned me to take my hands off the top of the cup, which I couldn't quite hear. Then, after I gave it to her, my caseworker came up to the front counter and reminded me not to do that. I felt really guilty about it, because I didn't think there was a certain way we were supposed to pick up the cups. Now I see why we place them upside down at my current job. Story 17. 1. When I was new at my job, I billed my client exactly the amount of hours that was estimated in the project budget. Not a big thing, but I didn't understand that you're supposed to bill actual hours. I thought since they had it in the budget, which was approved, I should bill that too. During COVID, I was working from home, and one slow day I missed a sales meeting with my manager plus potential client because I was playing StarCraft. Totally forgot about the meeting. It was no biggie though. We got the job, but ended up withdrawing from it due to certain reasons. Story 18. Not a massive mistake, but I still cringe about it. I accidentally hit my vape while I was on a video call with a client. We rarely did video calls, so I wasn't used to it. And I was multitasking in the background, so I wasn't even looking at my thumbnail. Big whoops. Story 19. My issue is not a big mistake, but rather a series of small ones. Basically, an analysis has to go out. It does, but it has wrong information in it. The administration then asks what those numbers mean, the ones related to the mistake. I send a second table to the people that have to send it to the administration, which then asked if the values were correct. Turns out even after the second evaluation, there are still mistakes in there. Now I'm on to the third email, and damn praying that there are no more mistakes, because my credibility has reached hellish levels of low ATM. Story 20. I work for a major airline, and one of the IT techs asked me to help them replace a battery for the server because they were heavy. I helped put the new battery in and take the old one out. 30 seconds later, our internet was out and stayed out for what I remember to be about 40 minutes. Had no access to work phones, weight and balance information, gate plots, etc. because it was all internet-based. Couldn't even imagine the tens of thousands it cost the company. Story 21. I was pitching a leveraged buyout opportunity to my investment committee, CEO, chief investment officer, etc., with the entire credit fund having the ability to dial into the phone conversation. I froze completely, even though I rehearsed my pitch 10x and had written the entire investment committee memo and knew the deal inside and out. I couldn't explain the rationale for doing the transaction as my brain and mouth froze. I had to recuse myself and reschedule the conversation. Life went on, it was embarrassing. People were super friendly about it. We still participated in the transaction. Story 22. I was writing an article about the AGM proceedings of a company. Well, I was in a rush to finish it and had multiple tabs open, so I added the details of another company's AGM, including their dividend payouts in this article. In the end, an investor called the mistake out on LinkedIn. Thankfully, I had fixed the error by the time my manager caught on to the LinkedIn post. However, now she's calling a team meeting and might involve our herb in a team and 1-1 feedback conversation. Here's to not getting fired. Story 23. This is actually one of my favorite interview questions to ask if I'm hiring someone with an engineering background. In my newbie engineering days, I took down a manufacturing line that made fluorescent light bulbs. It cost $9,000 a year and was offline for more than 8 hours. Not to mention the heaps of broken glass it was creating during the downtime that required literal shoveling. That mistake was more than my annual salary at the time. Story 24. Almost fell for an email scam. Would have lost $500K via wire transfer. Could have lost my job. Still shaken by this. We were scheduled to pay a large supplier $500K. The scammer knew and sent an email that looked very legitimate. The email strings showed I called the supplier to confirm the new bank wire info. I did not. Scammers only switched one letter on the supplier email address, so we didn't notice that it's a fake email. Story 25. In the middle of a recorded Teams lecture for my MBA economics lecture, the lecturer asked if anyone has any questions. My mate, unaware her mic was on, yelled out, "Yeah, how about you actually teach us something that doesn't come out of your dumb mouth?" Of course, she wasn't aware her mic was on until the lecturer paused to ask her what the problem was. Oh, it was so brutal. I watched it over and over again for laughs.